Brought to you by Dale Carnegie of Orange County. This is the 411 on Leadership podcast, where we discuss common sense leadership practices with executives in Southern California to transform you into the leader people want to follow. And this is the 411 on Leadership podcast. Today we finish our series, the SFL, Success, Failures, and Lessons Learned, focusing on the lesson of empathy. Interestingly enough, 72% of CEOs say the state of empathy needs to evolve, but 58% of CEOs say they struggle with consistently exhibiting empathy in the workplace. And this is from the study of workplace empathy by Business Solver in 2019. So we're grateful to have you here with us for this conversation. My name is Steve Thomas. This time to my right, it is John Campbell. And John, we also answer the age-old question, is why I always complain and say, man, I need to drink coffee. Why don't I drink coffee before the podcast? We're actually changing that today. Who says a dog can't change his stripes? An old dog can't change his stripes. So welcome, John.
Hey, good morning. Good Monday morning. So glad for us to be here. And hey, as always, this is interactive. We want to hear from you. So as we talk a little bit about empathy, why is that important for you as a leader? We're not just talking about this as some ethereal idea, but why is it important? So we want to hear from you. Leave your comments. Len, thanks for chiming in. Good to see you this morning. And then also on top of that, if you want to get involved in podcasting, you've got a story to tell. Hey, 2022 is coming up and it's time to start making that change and get involved and taking that next step forward. Sitch Radio is the place to go. Reach out to our contact, Brian, here at Sitch Radio, owner, operator, producer, making it happen. He's got a whole suite of podcast shows, and yours is the next one to add to it. So please make sure that you take a look at that and chime in. And again, we want to hear from you. Like, subscribe. It means a lot to us. It really does when you join the conversation. So Steve, not Sunday Night Football, SFL, right? That's not what we're talking about today.
No, we aren't, although I know that we are both football fanatics. But interestingly enough, so an article comes up on our news feed on LinkedIn, and it's showing itself a lot. And the article is entitled, "Empathy is the Most Important Leadership Skill, According to Research." And this article was written by Tracy Brower. And so looking at these past 18 months, John, I said, hey, you know what? I think let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Is that the case? And we'll go ahead, and we want to ask you that question. We love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Is empathy the most important leadership skill that we need right now? And so as we look at that, John, what are your initial thoughts? I know that you've run through the article a little bit, and so I'm curious to hear, what are your initial thoughts on this trait of empathy?
Well, it's interesting because when we think of leadership, we don't typically associate that phrase, empathy, is the first thing. If you were to list leadership skills and how I'm going to prioritize what's important in a leader, we don't put that first.
No,
we don't default to that. We talk about vision, we talk about strategy, we talk about expertise, leading people, motivating, and probably the foundation, that underlying thing that is the support to everything as a leader, is really empathy. And we don't talk about that enough. And so I'm glad that we're getting a chance to discuss that.
And I find it's interesting too, because I agree with you. When you think about a drill sergeant, or you think about, leadership as, that perception is like, in order to be a strong leader, you've got to be firm. Obviously, you need to be decisive and all that. So when empathy enters into the equation, again, that's not the first thing that we think about. We think it's like all lovey-dovey. And interestingly enough, though, I remember when the pandemic first started I was like a year and a half ago. It seems like 30 years ago.
It's almost 2 years ago.
I know. So, it seems like so much longer than that. And I remember conversations that I've been having with different leaders and managers. And one of the things that threw them for a loop was the fact that they found that they needed to listen a little bit more. They feel like, they needed to play the role of psychologist. However, understand, obviously, when we practice empathy, we don't necessarily have to be a psychologist, but for them, it was something that was a little uneasy, a little different, because, with everything that was going on, the pressures of now life spilling over into work because of the remote environment that everyone is. Yeah. So there was a melding of work and personal that was just happening all at one time. So leaders really had to work and and be in a position where they were listening more. And so when we talk about empathy, why would we need to be empathetic? We need to understand that the level of stress that currently is exhibiting right now is absolutely enormous.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, John, just as it relates to maybe the people you've spoken to, just the amounts of stress that people are facing right now?
Yeah, it is a big deal. They're facing stress. And then on the other side of it, it's interesting because we've talked about the Great Resignation on here multiple times. And you've heard that phrase.
Yep.
People don't leave a job, they leave a boss or a manager or a leader. And you've got people with skills and attributes. And for the most part, I think people want to work. We're not looking at lazy people, but how do we understand what motivates them and what encourages them to work and to move forward? And with this Great Resignation, we're saying, hey, I don't have to put up with that anymore. And we think of those phrases like put up with. Well, why is that? It's because we're working in an environment where we have a boss, a leader, maybe even coworkers who cause us stress. And a lot of that is attributed. If we're looking through these articles, I mean, we're talking significant numbers. We're talking 2/3 of people responding in the 60s and higher percent, talking about dealing with stress, talking about mental health issues, talking about being frustrated at work. And as you talked about, leaders saying that this is the most important skill. So what do you see is that why is that important then, Steve, for us in the work environment?
Yeah. So, going and focusing a little bit more on the stress and really just providing why empathy is needed even now. Looking at the article, this is a global study done by Qualtrics. It found that, to this point, 42% of people have experienced a decline in mental health. Let me throw some more statistics based on that study. Specifically, 67% of people are experiencing increases in stress, while 57% have increased anxiety. I mean, think about that for a little bit. If you look at our workforce, think that 67%, if we were to apply it to our team, 67% of our teams have experienced an increase in their stress, while 57% have experienced an increase in anxiety. And then another stat, 54% are emotionally exhausted. Now, think about all that. Think about when we're tired, right? When we get tired, we just kind of get more irritable, we get more cranky. And so as a result of that, where our performance is going to suffer. Our performance will suffer. And so when we talk about being empathetic, and we want to define that, I mean, there are different ways people define it. I mean, when we talk about empathy, we're talking about, according to Mark Marone's blog, focused on empathy. He says that having the capacity to comprehend what another person is experiencing from within that person's frame of reference. Really, it's understanding the person from their point of view. And so when we talk about stress and the importance of, say, the Great Resignation, those quality relationships are built on us having moments of empathy with our team. And that's not just us having, that's just us as leaders being empathetic with our people, but then it's also vice versa as well. You know what I mean? And it's not something that's just reserved for leaders. It's something reserved for people of influence. So we want to hear from you. We've put in the chat, or the question that we want to hear from you in the chat is empathy the most crucial skill for us as leaders today? Is empathy the most crucial skill for us as leaders today? Why? If you believe that it is, why do you think so? If not, why don't you think so? We'd love to hear from you in the chat. And I believe we have some thoughts in the chat already from Lynn.
Yeah, well, Lynn says that empathy is sadly lacking in many leaders, but is essential if we want to connect with our teams in a deeper, more authentic way. Completely agree with you. Great comment. Thanks for sharing that, Lynn. And it's one of those things, as you mentioned, Steve, that it's sad because we think of empathy sometimes as that we want to say touchy-feely, but the idea of being in tune with the thoughts, feelings, and actions of those we work with. I can see that play out as a leader. If you're looking at negotiating, How do you understand and put yourself in the situation of the person that you're on the other side of the table with?
Yeah.
If I can understand and empathetically connect with who they are, their thoughts, their feelings, what their goals and outcomes are, I'm going to be much more better as a negotiator.
Yeah.
And one of the other ways that we think about describing this is you can also sometimes inherently think of intuition, right? Because, we talk about, oh, that guy's got great intuitions, great. Well, a lot of times it's because they are in tune, and we don't call it that. They're empathizing with what's going on. They're reading a situation, and that's what somebody who has empathy can show. They can read a situation, understand what that person's going through, and be able to connect. And it is extremely important. So as we look at that going forward, so what else, Steve? We talked about, these are some, as we talked earlier, huge numbers. I mean, and as a leader, the ability to see improvement in your workplace. I was 70% of people say that they would be more engaged and effective at work if they have an empathetic leader. That's huge. 73%. That's massive.
What do you say to those, John, that are, let's say, on the flip side of that? Maybe they're hearing this and they're saying, you know what? I mean, empathy, it's not my thing. I mean, one of the stats we read at the beginning was, we have, leaders that believe that empathy is important, but then when it comes to practicing, there's that struggle to do it on a consistent basis. For some, they're thinking, well, why do I need to do it? Hey, you know what? The work needs to get done. That's the important thing. The work needs to get done. We need to grow as a business. We need to come together. Like, why do I need to be empathetic with my people? What would you say? What are your thoughts on that? And what are your feelings there?
Well, as we look at it, let me throw those statistics out that we were talking about. So we look at it from a realistic way, that the ability to be innovative as a team, 61% says that they are more innovative if they're working in an empathetic environment. As a leader, how can I turn my back on that and not want? And yes, there's the age-old debate with, well, that's not me. That's not who I am as a person. And there is some truth that some people are genetically more predisposed to being more empathetic. But it doesn't mean that can't be a growth area. Those skills that we talked about, and we're going to talk about here in the show in just a moment. And if you're tuning in, we're talking about the importance of empathy in a leader, and especially as we reflect back on here on 2021 and this last couple of years. So, Steve, what does that look like as you would address that as a leader? Say, hey, why? That's not me. That's not something that I'm interested in, but maybe I've hired somebody to do that, or I've got, so-and-so, they're good at it. Go talk to that person.
Sure. Yeah, no, it all goes back to our relationships and us building relationships with people. Now, for some, that's another thing where it's like, okay, that's too much lovey-dovey. I don't really have time for that. Or, that's just kind of not my thing. Understand this. And you had mentioned one of these stats as well. That's kind of one of the things, I appreciate a lot, is just a lot of these stats that come out from these studies. And so, looking at this article, again, when we talked about innovation, 61% of employees reported that they were more innovative than 13% of those that did not have empathetic leaders. When we talk about engagement, when we're talking about the Great Resignation, wanting to keep our teams intact, it's difficult for leaders or for organizations to find people to be part of their teams. I know that's one of the things our office is going through, right now, and connecting with different. It's tough. The market is tough out there to bring people onto our teams. And so what then can we do in order to retain the people that are on our teams? So when we talk about engagement, linking engagement to empathy, 76% of people who experienced empathy from their leaders reported that they were more engaged, as opposed to 32%. Retention, we're just talking about that when we're talking about retaining or holding on to our people and making sure that we're building our culture. We're talking about 57% of it says here, going more specifically, 57% of white women and 62% of women of color say that they are unlikely to think about leaving their companies when they felt like their life circumstances were respected and valued by that companies. On the flip side, when they didn't feel that way, the percentage was 14% and 30% respectively, when we're talking about white women and women of color. So even when we're talking about maintaining or building inclusive environments, which is, one of the things now that we as organizations, or I see organizations are priding themselves off of being an employer of choice, we see this idea of empathy being crucial in order for us to really maintain those inclusive environments where everybody is respected and everybody is valued. And so when we think about really just the role of empathy, just the importance of having that in our organizations, and just think about the flip side of that. When we're not being empathetic, then people will respond to that in a way, hey, you know what? My leader doesn't really care what I say. So when there's meetings, I'm not going to really contribute. Or maybe we're working with a customer and we're dealing with clients. And if I find that, you know, the people that I'm buying things from or purchasing from, when they're not empathetic to my needs and the fact that, you know, they may have missed something, or when there's an error that's come into play, then they're going to look to go somewhere else for business.
Right.
They're going to look to go somewhere else for business. So we want to continue to hear from you, and we've got some thoughts coming in the comments. And thank you so much for those thoughts. I know we've got some stuff from Todd. If you have comments, we're talking about the lesson of empathy and the fact of, do you think that it's a crucial skill for us? Do you think that it's the crucial skill for leaders today? And so looking at some of these comments, John, I don't know if you would mind, if you've got a chance to look at some of these. I see Todd. Todd, thanks so much, man. Always supporting us on the podcast. We see that you've got a couple of thoughts. And John, what is Todd saying?
Yeah, so he's saying empathy means seeing and understanding the feelings of another. Emotional intelligence help you to manage the moods in the midst of that recognition. Together, you can see what your EQ is. A high EQ score is critical in leadership. And you know, reading the room, and that leads to one of the examples that I have in a work environment. We were at a situation where we had an all staff meeting once, and the president was looking to get everybody on board and to, you know, get that extra effort, to give that discretionary effort to take us to the next level. And at the time when he was addressing the room, and this is all staff in the organization, and he's behind the podium up on a platform, and I was like, he's not reading the room. He's not reading the room. His empathetic level, his EQ wasn't tuned in, and I saw it as clear as day. I was like, if he'd come around the podium, come down off the stage, and you know, kind of got on the same level to us and made it more like connected with us on that next level, it would have made all the difference in the world. I was like, the room would have stood up and like been, I'll take whatever hill you want us to take. It was, and so as Todd talks about that, being able to read what's going on in a situation, and it's so important. And we've got things that we've worked on, Steve, as far as trying to understand it, because then we can't stress this enough. One of those things, let me back up, because there's two things. That one of those is the Dale Carnegie study that we've talked about, that 47% of people are looking for their next job. So if half your workforce were to leave in the next year, how impactful would that be? And it could have changed, and I would say gone up over the last year or so with the things that are going. And then in one of the other studies that we looked at, there was a paycheck study that said 33% of employees say that they would leave a job if their manager didn't show enough empathy. So a third of your workforce is ready to split if you're not connecting with them. And that's essentially what empathy is. Are you connecting with your people, understanding where they're at, being able to view those things? And the second part, how can you respond, right? I need to understand, but then what do I do with that? It's one thing to know, okay, Steve's having a bad day. All right.
No, absolutely.
No, what do I do with that?
No, absolutely. And so one of the things I love about Dale Carnegie in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yeah, it's been around a long time.
Does he have something to say about this? Are you kidding me?
I feel like all 30 principles are practical steps that we can utilize to build empathy, with our team. And so,
but Steve, that was almost 100 years ago. Man.
I know.
Is this still valuable?
That's
today?
what I love about principles, because principles never die, never go away. They never get old, but they're always relevant. And especially when we're talking about working with our teams, building those deep relationships. I feel like that's kind of taken for granted. I think because it's said so much, it's almost like, it's what we like to say, it's the common sense, but not common practice.
Right.
But we just see just the importance, especially now. And think about this, we talk about where we are business wise. Talk about when we want to maintain our teams, we want to retain our teams. But let's take a step deeper. And what I mean by that is, it's the holiday season. And, typically when we think about the holiday season, it's time that, we're having a chance to get with our families. We're engaging in the family traditions. I'm so fortunate. I'm going to be hitting New York to visit my family again in the next couple of weeks. And I haven't been with my family for, on a Christmas, by the way, I haven't been with my family for, I don't know, a number of years.
Yeah.
And, so with the holidays come a general sense of, happiness, that holiday cheer.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, you have those that they may have lost loved ones.
Yeah.
Or you have some that traumatic experiences may have happened around this time. Like I was connected with someone who around this time, they had lost their first child. And I remember reading that, and I mean, that's just one of the things that just, really touched me, because for many, the holidays are a time of cheer, but for others, the holidays, that's not that type of time.
Yeah.
So why am I bringing this up? Because now with work and personal being melded all the more because the remote environment, people are having their work performance impacted because of what's going on at home. And so for us as leaders, for us to kind of overlook that and negate that, that is something that really is going to really build more of that separation. And so when we talk about the need for empathy and how we can practice it on a day-to-day, Dale Carnegie's got some great principles.
That's right.
A few that pop up that I think of immediately is, principle number 7, being a good listener, encouraging others to talk about themselves. I want to focus in on the one word: encourage others to talk about themselves. Think about that, encouraging others. So as leaders, how are we encouraging others to talk about themselves? Here's a way that you don't encourage people to talk about themselves. And I'm sure we've had this conversation. It's where we're talking with people and, they're sharing with us what's going on, from a work perspective, or they're sharing with us what's going on at home.
Yeah.
And so because we want to connect with them and because we want to, problem solve, we'll come in with our own story without us knowing, and without us knowing, we're hijacking the conversation. And in a way it's being perceived, by the other person listening as somewhat dismissive. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? I'm not going to really share anymore, because it really becomes all about you and not about the conversation. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's practicing that active listening. So, and especially when we're looking at this in remote environment, it is extremely important to stay connected with our teams. And that's not monitoring them and making them check in every 5 minutes. It's just one of those practical steps. Like when you are talking to someone on a virtual meeting, are you looking at the camera, or are you looking at your work or your screen? That it makes a huge difference. Try it sometime and see how you respond when someone that you're on a virtual meeting with, because if you were in person, you'd be talking to them and you'd be engaging with them and connecting with them. And virtual cues is such a key element in communication. So those are some of the simple ways to do it. But I like that you bring up here, as we're looking at the end of the year, and for many people, it's a holiday season. Kids are out of school. They're maybe hoping to try to get a chance to see family. Maybe they haven't seen family. This happens all the time, but particularly right now, maybe they haven't seen family in a couple of years because everybody's plans got canceled in the last 2 years, travel, visiting for a lot of those reasons. Maybe you as a leader can understand and figure out what's going on. Could they get their work done remotely? And I only know that because if I'm being empathetic and connecting with them and trying to understand what are they going through. Maybe they're fine. Maybe their family's traveling, they're good. And guess what? They could pick up an extra shift, and you don't know that if you don't connect with them.
Exactly. And it reminds me of another principle that is really key for our conversations. And one of the things that we don't mention a lot about, and this is what's going on in today's workplace, is, the amount of polarization that's out there, the amount of division that's out there. I mean, people are beginning to bring that to work. You know how we say normally at work, hey, you know, we don't discuss religion and politics. Well, that unfortunately is changing, where that's becoming more of the national discourse. And so when we talk about, you know, having these type of empathetic conversations, a principle that comes to mind is principle number 17, where it says, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And here's the word that sticks out to me that is important for us as leaders. Try honestly. What does it look like for us as leaders to try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view? Maybe that looks like us refraining from, you know, immediately giving our input, and no matter how difficult it is to hear. That looks like in asking those questions, like, you know what, tell me a little bit more about that, or, you know what, I'm sorry that, you know, this is how you're feeling. You know, that must be very difficult for you here. You know, some of it, you know, empathetic statements. And I'm curious to hear from you, those that are paying attention. What are those empathetic statements that you use in those day-to-day conversations? Go ahead and put that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. What are those empathetic statements that you're using as you're building and cultivating relationships through empathy with people on your team? So when we're looking at that and having those types of conversations, it allows us, as you mentioned, for us to get to those solutions on how we as leaders can best meet the needs of our people, and vice versa when we're having those conversations with those that we report to, you know, or our clients and our guests. Really setting that, what we talk about a lot of, that psychological safety, really setting that environment in which we're more innovative and we're able to that we're able to provide more solutions that would be beneficial for both sides.
Absolutely. And here's one of those other practical things, the application, as far as where does this come into play? And Steve, I know we've seen this before in other business environments where different departments have conflict. And as a leader, if you need something from the other department, maybe you're sales and you need product, or maybe you're marketing and you need sales, or vice versa, or whatever the development and things are. And if you can try honestly to see things from their perspective, maybe it helps bridge that gap a little bit and give an understanding, and maybe you can help get to what you both want the company to succeed. It's absolutely not like, oh, we want our company to fail, that's why I'm trying to block this other person. No, it's like, I'm a leader and I'm protecting my team, and you're a leader and you want to protect your team, but we need to get on the same page. And a way to do that, as you said, trying to honestly to see from their perspective. And maybe you're trying to ask them to get double their production on right before the holidays and the end of the year. And they're like, no, I've got people taking vacation, you know what I mean? Whatever that is. But you can only do that if you have that ability to have those conversations, to listen, to trying to hear from their perspective what's going on. And it'll help you be a better leader in the organization that way.
Here's the challenge, though, and we'll put it out. And this is the challenge for all of us, especially if we're looking and we're wrapping up this conversation. Here's the challenge. The challenge for us as leaders, if we really want to be more empathetic with our team, here's the starting point. Here's the challenge and I thought about this, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, it really begins with giving people your full attention. That is easier said than done. Like, I remember last week I was facilitating an in-person workshop, and it was pretty exciting because everybody was was in person. And so, as we were having the conversations, and I'm having conversations before, I begin the session, and obviously you're seeing people that that you want to say hi to. But then, like, you're talking with, someone that maybe you haven't spoken to in a while, or in this case, it was someone that I just met. And so I'm having conversations and I'm listening more of her story. But the challenge was, hey, you know what? I see this person here that I know, or I see that person here that I know. And it was just really challenging in that moment to remain focused on that individual and give her my full attention. And so I mentioned that because obviously in our workspaces, we have a lot that's going on, right? We've got a lot of, we have a lot of distractions. We have a lot of fires that we need to put out. We have a lot of issues that we need to handle. However, what would it look like if we really want to be more of that empathetic leader? What does it look like for us to give people our full attention?
Yes.
Maybe that's, having people come into our office and, shutting the door. Maybe that's, just maintaining that eye contact, or if people come in or, are looking to distract, just, refocusing back on the individual. But I think for us, if we really want to be that empathetic leader and really solidify those connections, really it's being able to give people our full attention. What are your thoughts on that? And I think we've got a couple more comments in the chat section as well.
Yeah, it is extremely important to be engaged in that one-on-one situation. And people know it. You know it as a leader when you're talking with someone, whether they're giving you their full attention or not. And that's the first start. And as you mentioned earlier, part of being a leader is to also include those conversation, like to dig deeper into it. When they give you that answer, you tell me more. Expand on that a little bit. Share with me. Oh, you mentioned this. And it doesn't always have to be just personal. It could be work. It could be whatever it is that they're going through, but to help you to understand that. And you can only do that if you're engaged with them visually. And as you mentioned, we have, or did you want to?
I was going to say, John, to piggyback on that, because I think one of the things, that's not saying that we need to hold counseling sessions. I mean, we're not saying, well, you got to go out and get PhDs here. Okay. When we talk about being, empathetic, we can be empathetic without having a PhD. We can be empathetic without being a counselor. Sometimes it would require more times than others. We're not saying, hey, you know what, spend all of your time having deep level conversations and not getting anything done. However, there is space, or as leaders, we need to intentionally create space where we are providing that psychological safety for us to have those conversations, being empathetic, which leads to, the comment that was mentioned by Cecile, who mentions what she does in order to create that empathetic. By the way, man, Cecile's awesome. I love that girl. She love that lady, lady. So,
he can
she
say
says
that.
The question says the question I ask when I speak to people is, how are you doing? How are you doing today? Not just how are you, but being intentional and asking how you're doing at the present time. So yes, thank you so much for that empathy statement. Is just, more than the, hey, how's it going? And kind of expecting a pat answer. But really being intentional and asking people how they're doing. So Cecile, thank you so much for that comment. And then also Todd mentions he likes to take the pressure off his team members. And he mentions, I hear what you're saying, so really he's using what Dale Carnegie used, kind of that cushion statement, where it just really shows that, that we're hearing and understanding. Now, again, if we're saying, I understand what you're saying, we want to be intentional with that statement, because there comes a point where we can always use that and we may not understand. And so, people can kind of sense that, but really being genuine and authentic and figuring out a solution together. So Todd, thank you so much for those comments. Lynn mentioned some other comments as well. John, what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, talking about, making eye contact, seeing the importance of those kind of things. And as we're looking to transition, Steve, to wrap up, what is that next step that someone says, okay, you guys convinced me. I understand empathy is important in myself as a leader. Talked about some of these different practical things. We know Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends, Influence People, is essentially a lesson on being an empathetic and a powerful leader. Steve, what's the next steps? What does somebody do today to begin to be a better leader using empathy?
Yeah. So again, I will refer to it. And by the way, if you are registered for this, podcast, we want to send this to you. This is our golden book. If we're talking about some actionable, practical steps in order for us to begin or to continue to practice empathy, we'll be sending this golden book out to you that outlines really all 30 30 ways that we can practice empathy. So what does it look like today? Maybe today you want to spend some time, with someone you hadn't connected with before. Maybe you have already connected with them, but really doesn't figure out what's going on with them. Maybe you're sensing their performance may not be where it needs to be, or you just kind of detect that something's wrong. What does it look like for you this week to spend 5 extra minutes having those type of conversations? And as Cecile mentioned, asking the question, how are you? Really, tell me about what's happening with you. I like Lynn's comment that she put in the chat, where her manager always ends the conversation by saying, hey, you know what do you need from me? Or how can I best support you? So there's some really practical things in this chat that we can utilize really in order for us as leaders to be more empathetic, especially if we're talking about mitigating the effects of the Great Resignation and making sure our organization becomes the employer of choice by maintaining and retaining our culture, making sure that it's an inclusive culture. Empathy, is going to be key and is going to be crucial for that. Well, it looks like we've gone a little bit over. That's because this is our last podcast of the year, and this has just been something, a lesson that John and I continue to learn, and John and I continue, as you can tell, that we're we're passionate about, especially not just during the holidays, but just moving forward and really building those strong connections with our team, and really being able to, from a business perspective, really being able to retain them, really being able to make sure that we have a culture that is accomplishing organizational goals. If you are registered for this, you'll be getting these resources in the email that we sent to you if you are registered for this particular podcast. And so thank you so much for your feedback. Want to answer one more question for you, John, before we go for the day. A couple of things, and I appreciate you all sticking with us for a little while longer. The question is, why don't I drink coffee? So today is the first time I actually have drunk coffee. I always complain that I don't drink coffee. We're just having a little bit of fun here, by the way. Why don't I drink coffee before a podcast? This is going to probably seem very anticlimactic, but as you can tell, normally when I come in, I'm pretty amped up, coming in to these podcasts. So usually coffee gets me a little bit more wound up, a little bit more excited. I kind of feel like I'm that way now because I'm talking like 500 words a minute. That's why I try to lay off this. But I believe that it is the elixir of life, and it's an awesome thing to have. So
that's a good thing.
Anticlimactic, by the way. John.
Yeah. So, and to all of you, we want to thank so much for joining us this year as we've gone through so many of these things here at the 411 on leadership and trying to give you practical tips, tools, and advice on to help you to become that leader that people want to follow. And we hope that you have a fantastic new year as you look forward to 2022.
And John, before we go, I want to take the opportunity to appreciate you, appreciate working with you. I mean, this has been a journey since March, and there's no other person I could think of to have these types of conversations about leadership. And I just want to say I appreciate knowing you and your story. I'm wishing you and your family a wonderful holiday season. Yes. Also want to take the time to appreciate Brian as well. Brian's our producer here at Stitch Radio. He makes all this happen. Also Joey as well. Joey's our new our new guy here, and he has been the one producing our shows these last couple of weeks. So Joey, want to say thanks to you as well. But thank you to everybody here at Stitch Radio for making all this happen, for giving us this platform to be able to really discuss how we could all become the leader that other people like to follow. And so with that being said, just as a reminder, as we always do, we always tell you, remember that managers light a fire under people while leaders light a fire in people. Have a wonderful holiday season.